It didn't start today, and it won't end tomorrow. But something just changed, dramatically. The United States has struck Iran, and the world is holding its breath. How did we get here? What happens next? Let's trace the fuse, before the fire spreads. This is the start of World War III, America's attack on Iran. Chapter 1. An old rivalry rekindled. History rarely forgets a grudge, and between the United States and Iran, that grudge runs deep. A tale not just of oil and politics, but of betrayal, revolution, and a dream that soured. To understand today's firestorm, we must begin decades ago, in the shadows of a palace coup. The 1953 CIA coup against Mossadegh. In 1953, a nation stood at a crossroads. Iran's elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, dared to reclaim his country's oil from British control. The price? American wrath. The CIA and MI6 launched Operation Ajax, a covert operation that toppled Mossadegh and reinstated the Shah, a monarch more favorable to Western interests. It was a victory cloaked in silence, a foreign fingerprint on a nation's soul. Iranians would never forget. The Shah and the revolution, from Western puppet to exile. With Mossadegh gone, the Shah ruled with an iron crown, backed by American weapons and dollars. Modernization on the surface, but underneath fear. His secret police crushed dissent, and Westernization alienated the deeply religious. In 1979, that dam burst. The Iranian people rose in revolution, casting out the Shah in a tidal wave of fury and faith. Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile, and with him came a new Islamic republic, proud, wounded, and deeply suspicious of the West. Hostages and hatred, 1979, the U.S. Embassy crisis. Then came the breaking point. November 4th, 1979. Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. 52 Americans taken hostage. For 444 days, the world watched in disbelief. This wasn't just a diplomatic crisis. It was a national humiliation. For America, it cemented Iran as the enemy. For Iran, it was retribution. A new Cold War had begun, not of superpowers, but of ideologies and wounds left open. The axis of evil, Bush-era rhetoric and deeper sanctions. 2 decades later, another name stirred the flames, George W. Bush. In his 2002 State of the Union address, Iran was labeled part of the axis of evil. Sanctions tightened, rhetoric sharpened. Even moderates within Iran were pushed to the margins. A generation who hoped for reform found themselves caught between two powers who no longer listened. Dialogue crumbled. Distrust hardened. Broken trust, from the nuclear deal to Trump's withdrawal. But diplomacy wasn't dead, not yet. In 2015, after years of negotiation, the Iran nuclear deal offered a fragile path forward. Sanctions lifted in exchange for nuclear limits. Hope returned, briefly. Then came 2018. President Trump, breaking with allies and advisors, pulled out of the deal. The promise shattered. Iran resumed enrichment. Tensions soared. For Tehran, it was proof the West couldn't be trusted. For Washington, it was a necessary reset. For the rest of us, it was a step closer to the edge. History doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. And as missiles fly and alliances fracture, we are left with a question we've asked before. Is this rivalry destined for war? Or can the past finally teach us peace? Chapter 2. Red Lines and Proxy Wars. While leaders speak from podiums, others wage war in the shadows. Welcome to the second battlefield, the quiet war of proxies, drones, and double games. The front line may not be marked on any map, but its wounds stretch across a region already on fire. Shadow battles, Iran in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Iran's power doesn't stop at its borders. From Baghdad to Beirut, Tehran has built a network of influence, militias, political allies, and arms that serve its aims. In Syria, Iran propped up Assad's regime during the brutal civil war, sending advisors and fighters. In Iraq, it backed Shiite militias who would later clash with US forces. And in Lebanon, Hezbollah became more than a proxy. It became a model. These aren't mere alliances. They are pressure points, activated when needed, denied when convenient. The Soleimani strike, January 2020, and its fallout. Qasem Soleimani, the architect of Iran's shadow wars, revered at home, feared abroad. His presence was strategy personified. But in January 2020, an American drone turned him into a symbol. Targeted and killed at Baghdad airport, Soleimani's death stunned the region. Iran vowed revenge. Missiles were launched at US bases in Iraq. Tensions reached a boiling point, and a world already holding its breath feared war was moments away. Tensions at sea, tanker attacks, and Gulf skirmishes. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage, but a vast risk. A fifth of the world's oil flows through these waters. Iran knows this. In 2019, tankers were attacked, seized, or sabotaged. Washington blamed Tehran. Tehran denied it. Each incident pushed navies closer. One wrong move, one misfire, and the world economy could stall. It's not just a maritime standoff. It's a reminder of how close we live to catastrophe. Drones and deception, the covert war in cyberspace. Not all wars need boots or bombs. In the 21st century, war is also waged in code. Iran has been accused of cyber attacks against banks, infrastructure, even election systems. The US responded in kind. Viruses, hacks, right sabotage, unseen battles with real-world consequences. And then, there are the drones. Iran's unmanned arsenal grows. Some strike, others spy. In the fog of digital war, truth is the first casualty. Sanctions and survival. How Iran adapted under pressure. Crippling sanctions, isolated banks, blocked oil sales. For many nations, this would be a death sentence. But Iran adapted. New partners in Asia, black market channels, domestic production. Painful, yes, but survivable. And in surviving, Iran grew more defiant. What was meant to weaken its resolve, instead, hardened it. A nation under siege learned to live behind the wall. Red lines are meant to prevent war, but too often, they become invitations to cross them. Proxy battles may seem far away, but their ripple effects are not. Chapter 3. The Trigger, What Just Happened. It didn't come out of nowhere, and yet, to the world, it felt like the ground had shifted overnight. In the early hours of a tense Saturday, the United States launched a targeted military strike. Iran was hit. The world held its breath. The breaking point. What led to the current US strike? In recent weeks, intelligence had been building. Reports of Iranian-backed militias mobilizing. Cyber attacks escalating. Threats exchanged in back channels. But what triggered it? A drone strike in the Gulf. A missile aimed at a US base. Or something darker hidden from public view. The Pentagon says it was imminent. Iran says it was provoked. Somewhere in the fog of war, the truth blurs. Targets and damage, what was hit, and why it matters. Precision missiles struck 3 key locations in Iran. a military installation outside Shiraz, a cyber warfare hub near Isfahan, and a suspected nuclear research facility on the outskirts of Natanz. Each target chosen for its strategic value. Each strike calibrated to avoid mass casualties. But war isn't clean. And to Iranians on the ground, it didn't feel precise. In a matter of minutes, years of tension erupted into flames. The White House justifies official reasons and hidden motives. The president addressed the nation from the East Room. "We acted to prevent a larger conflict," he said. "America will not wait for our enemies to strike first." But not everyone was convinced. Critics pointed to low approval ratings, election pressures, and a history of wag-the-dog distractions. Was this about security or political survival? The White House insists it was both. Iran responds, initial retaliation, and global reactions. Within hours, Iranian missiles targeted American assets in Iraq. Protests surged in Tehran. A senior general vowed 1,000 cuts in return. Allies condemned the violence. Some called for restraint. Others, like Israel and Saudi Arabia, signaled quiet approval. In global capitals, embassies went on alert. Oil prices surged, stock markets tumbled. The world watched, bracing for what might come next. Media, chaos, and confusion. The battle for public opinion. On screens and feeds, the war unfolded in fragments. A TikTok from a rooftop in Tehran. A leak from an intelligence report. A tearful interview with a mother in Dallas. Narratives clashed. Whispers of World War III trended. Cable news split down partisan lines. Truth became a casualty. In a war where information moves faster than missiles, the real battle is for belief. This was not the beginning of the story, but it might be the moment the world remembers. And now, with the first blow struck, the next chapter may write itself in fire or in diplomacy. Chapter 4: Global Shockwaves. Missiles fade, but consequences echo. In the days after the strike, the map of the Middle East seemed to tremble. Tensions flared, alliances were tested, and across the region, old wounds burned with new fire. This is the fallout. Escalation zones, where the conflict could ignite. Baghdad, Beirut, the Strait of Hormuz. These aren't just names, they're dominoes. And in the aftermath of the US strike, each one teeters on the edge. Iran's allies have taken positions. American bases are on alert. And Israel? Already preparing for a war it spent years anticipating. This isn't just a two-player game anymore. It's a fuse that stretches across a region long soaked in oil and history. Civilian frontlines, the hidden cost of war. War never stays on the battlefield. It creeps into homes, into water supplies, into the lullaby of a frightened child. In Iran, blackouts and fuel lines. In neighboring countries, panic buying and displaced families. Hospitals brace for shortages. Refugees fear new borders may never open again. While leaders posture and pundits argue, it's the ordinary people who carry the cost. Diplomacy on the brink. Allies and adversaries respond. At the UN, urgent meetings. In Brussels, NATO splits. Some leaders demand de-escalation. Others quietly calculate what this chaos might buy them. Russia condemns the strike, but eyes new opportunities. China offers to mediate, but deepens trade ties with Tehran. And the EU? Torn between dependence on American power and fear of an unchained Iran. Diplomacy limps, but it's not dead yet. Economic shockwaves, oil, trade, and global unrest. The Strait of Hormuz, where a fifth of the world's oil flows, now bristles with warships. Prices spike, markets tremble, logistics chains buckle as insurers flee the Gulf. Airlines reroute flights, emerging markets see capital flight. From gas pumps in Texas to wheat prices in Egypt, the world feels every tremor from this quake. Whispers of peace. Can anyone pull back from the edge? In the shadows, back channels buzz. Oman, Switzerland, even Qatar. Old brokers of impossible deals reach out. There are voices, too, from within. Former generals, diplomats, even the Pope, calling for pause. Because everyone knows, one more misstep, and the world wakes up to a war it cannot contain. The only question is, will anyone listen in time? Fallout isn't just radiation. It's grief. It's uncertainty. It's the moment after a scream when the world holds its breath. This chapter is still being written, but its ending may depend on how much we remember of the past. Chapter 5. The Road Ahead. It's no longer a question of if. The world must now ask, what happens next? After decades of rivalry, covert battles, and now open strikes, the future hangs in the balance. Not just for Iran and the US, but for everyone. The diplomatic tightrope, allies, enemies, and uncertainties. Washington scrambles to assure allies, NATO partners, Pacific allies, even old foes who prefer order over escalation. But behind closed doors, fear dominates. Can back-channel diplomacy prevent a wider war, or has the window already closed? Meanwhile, Iran courts China, tightens with Russia, and warns of a new global alignment. The Cold War playbook, rewritten. Domestic fallout, what it means at home. Gas prices spike, markets reel, and suddenly, the war is here, on Main Street. Young people worry about a draft. Veterans recall déjà vu. Protesters flood city squares with signs that read, "Not again." In Congress, hearings begin. What did the president know? Was this legal? Was it wise? A nation divided becomes a nation on edge. Iran's path forward. Retaliation, resistance, or reform. Tehran walks a knife's edge. The regime stokes nationalism while fearing uprising. Some call for direct retaliation. Others, especially the young, want no more death. Military leaders flex. Civil society mourns. The supreme leader appears on national TV. We will endure. We will overcome. We will not be erased. But what does endurance mean in the shadow of satellites and sanctions? Flashpoints to watch where it could ignite again. The Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for global oil. Iraq, still a battlefield for influence. Israel and Hezbollah, one misstep from war. And cyberspace, where the lines are already crossed. Every moment of quiet feels temporary. Every headline feels like a match waiting for fuel. Lessons from history. Can peace prevail? From Cuba to Korea, history has flirted with annihilation and stepped back. Will this be one of those moments? Veteran diplomats call for talks. Young voices on both sides yearn for something different. But the machinery of war is loud. It's easier to shoot than to speak. And so we end, on the edge of a question. Is this where it ends or begins? This is not just geopolitics. It's humanity at a crossroads. We tell these stories not to stoke fear, but to seek understanding, because the next move belongs to us. History does not end, it echoes, and what we do today becomes tomorrow's tale. Thank you for joining us on this journey through conflict, memory, and consequence. If today's story gave you pause or opened a new door, share it. And if you'd like to carry a piece of history with you, visit our Timeless Tales collection. Every design tells a truth. To stay ahead of the next turning point, don't just subscribe, click the little bell, so you'll never miss a chapter of history as it happens. Till next time, stay safe.